When historians look back at the early 21st century, they may well point to one of the most significant yet underreported global shifts of our time, the transformation of African infrastructure through international partnership. And at the center of this transformation stands China, a nation that has leveraged decades of its own development experience to help reshape the physical landscape of an entire continent. Infrastructure isn't just about roads and buildings. It's about opportunity. It's about whether a farmer can get crops to market before they spoil. It's about whether a hospital has reliable electricity during surgery. It's about whether children can attend school without walking for hours through impassable terrain. For developing nations, quality infrastructure forms the bedrock upon which everything else is built. Economic growth, healthcare systems, education, and social mobility. China learned this lesson through its own remarkable journey. Over the past 4 decades, the country has constructed more highways, high-speed rail lines, bridges, and power stations than perhaps any nation in history. This experience hasn't just enriched China, it's created a knowledge base that's now being shared across continents. And nowhere is this transfer of expertise more visible than in Africa. Africa is a continent of paradoxes. It holds immense natural wealth, minerals, oil, agricultural potential, and a young growing population that could drive economic expansion for generations. Yet despite these advantages, much of the continent struggles with basic infrastructure that wealthier nations take for granted. Reliable roads, consistent electricity, modern hospitals, and adequate housing remain distant dreams for hundreds of millions of Africans. This infrastructure gap isn't just an inconvenience. It's a barrier that prevents Africa from realizing its full economic potential. Without proper roads, businesses can't efficiently move goods. Without reliable power, factories can't operate consistently. Without modern hospitals, healthcare outcomes suffer. The absence of these fundamental building blocks creates a cycle that's difficult to break. But over the past 2 decades, something remarkable has been happening. Chinese construction firms, backed by significant investment and technical expertise, have been working alongside African governments to tackle some of the continent's most pressing infrastructure challenges. From solar farms in landlocked nations to housing developments in coastal capitals, from disease control centers to orthopedic hospitals, these projects are quietly reshaping African communities. Today, we're going to explore some of the most impactful infrastructure initiatives China has undertaken across Africa. We'll examine how these projects work, who benefits from them, and what they mean for the future of a continent on the move. If you find this exploration valuable, consider subscribing to stay informed about global development stories that don't always make mainstream headlines. Let's begin our journey in southern Africa, in a nation facing an energy crisis that threatened to derail its entire economy. The power crisis in Zambia. When the rains stopped coming, Zambia is a landlocked country in southern Africa with a population of around 20 million people. For decades, the nation has relied heavily on hydroelectric power, electricity generated by flowing water through massive dams. This made economic sense. Zambia has significant water resources, including the mighty Zambezi River, and hydropower is relatively clean and, once built, inexpensive to operate. But this dependence created a dangerous vulnerability. Climate patterns across southern Africa have been shifting. Rainfall that once arrived predictably has become erratic. Dry seasons have lengthened and intensified. What were once occasional droughts have become more frequent and severe. And when the rains don't come, rivers run low. When rivers run low, hydroelectric dams can't generate power. By 2019, Zambia found itself in the grip of an unprecedented energy emergency. The statistics were staggering. The country faced an electricity deficit exceeding 700 megawatts during peak dry season months. To put that in perspective, that's enough power to serve several million people. The government had no choice but to implement rolling blackouts, scheduled power cuts that rotated through different regions. But these weren't brief inconveniences. In some areas, electricity was available for only 6 hours per day. Communities went 18 hours without power. Hospitals struggled to keep critical equipment running. Refrigeration for food and medicine became unreliable. Students couldn't study after dark. Small businesses that depended on electric tools or equipment faced impossible choices: operate sporadically or close entirely. The economic toll was crushing. Manufacturing plants reduced production or shut down completely. International investors grew nervous about expanding operations in a country where electricity couldn't be guaranteed. Zambia's economic growth, which had been promising, began to stall. The power crisis threatened to become a broader economic catastrophe. Government officials explored every option. They looked at importing electricity from neighboring countries, but that was expensive and still dependent on those nations having surplus power. They considered building new hydroelectric facilities, but those take years to construct and would still be vulnerable to the same droughts. They needed a solution that was fast, reliable, and didn't depend on rainfall. The answer was shining down on them every day. There's a certain irony to drought. The same weather patterns that dry up rivers and cripple hydroelectric dams also bring cloudless skies and abundant sunshine. Zambia sits in a region with some of the best solar potential on Earth: strong, consistent sunlight throughout the year. What if that sunlight could be captured and converted directly into electricity? In 2023, Zambian officials developed an ambitious plan: construct a massive solar photovoltaic power generation network that could provide reliable electricity regardless of rainfall. It was bold thinking, but it came with significant challenges. Building solar farms at this scale requires advanced technology: high-efficiency panels, sophisticated inverters, grid integration systems, and energy storage solutions. It also requires substantial capital investment, something Zambia, already strained by the economic impacts of power shortages, struggled to provide. The government began reaching out to international partners, hoping to find companies and countries willing to invest in and build this critical infrastructure. The response was disappointing. Many potential partners assessed the project and concluded the financial returns didn't justify the risks. Building large-scale solar installations in a landlocked African nation with limited existing infrastructure presented logistical complexities. Some companies simply weren't interested. But China saw something different. Chinese officials and enterprises viewed this not just as a construction contract, but as an opportunity to forge a deeper partnership with an African nation in genuine need. After a competitive bidding process involving Chinese firms, PowerChina, officially known as the China Power Construction Corporation, emerged as the winning contractor. PowerChina brought impressive credentials to the table. The company had constructed power generation facilities across dozens of countries, from Latin America to Southeast Asia. They had extensive experience with solar technology and, crucially, with building in challenging environments. Their proposal included not just construction expertise, but financial support mechanisms to help make the project economically viable for Zambia. The agreement that was finalized represented a comprehensive partnership. According to the terms, the solar initiative would be implemented in 3 distinct phases across 3 strategic locations within Zambia: Kabwe, a city in the central province with significant mining operations; Kariba North Shore, along one of Africa's largest man-made lakes; and Lower Kafue, an area with substantial agricultural activity. Each site would host a 200-megawatt solar power station, a substantial facility covering hundreds of acres with thousands of photovoltaic panels. These wouldn't be standalone installations. Each power station would come with complete supporting infrastructure: transmission lines to connect to the national grid, transformation substations to convert the electricity to usable voltages, and monitoring systems to ensure optimal performance. The construction timeline was aggressive: 12 months per station. This meant engineers, construction workers, and equipment would need to work efficiently despite potential rainy seasons, equipment deliveries, and the coordination challenges of building in multiple locations simultaneously. When completed, the three stations would collectively generate 600 megawatts of clean electricity annually. To understand the magnitude of this, consider that 600 megawatts can power approximately 600,000 homes, or provide electricity to millions of people when accounting for commercial and industrial use. This represented a meaningful solution to Zambia's power deficit. Not a complete fix, but a substantial improvement that could restore economic activity and improve daily life for ordinary Zambians. Beyond the immediate power generation, the project brought additional benefits. During construction and ongoing operations, thousands of Zambians found employment. Engineers, electricians, laborers, security personnel, maintenance workers, and administrative staff. These weren't just temporary jobs. Solar facilities require ongoing maintenance, monitoring, and management, creating sustained employment opportunities. For many Zambian families living in poverty, these jobs represented life-changing income. Young people gained technical training in renewable energy systems, skills that would serve them throughout their careers as Africa increasingly embraces clean energy. The knowledge transfer from Chinese engineers to Zambian workers created a foundation for future domestic solar projects. Once fully operational, this solar network became Africa's largest solar power generation complex, a title that reflects both its scale and its significance. It demonstrated that African nations could rapidly deploy renewable energy infrastructure when provided with the right partnership and support. It showed that solutions to climate-related challenges could come from embracing the very conditions, abundant sunshine, that climate change creates. Let's shift our focus from power generation to an even more ambitious challenge: stopping a desert. The Sahel region stretches across Africa like a band, separating the Sahara Desert to the north from more fertile grasslands to the south. This transitional zone passes through nearly a dozen countries, from Senegal on the Atlantic coast to Djibouti on the Red Sea. For centuries, the Sahel supported pastoral communities, subsistence agriculture, and delicate ecosystems adapted to semi-arid conditions. But over the past 100 years, this region has experienced devastating environmental degradation. A combination of factors, changing rainfall patterns, unsustainable farming practices, overgrazing, deforestation, and rising temperatures, has pushed the desert southward. What was once marginal farmland has turned to dust. Communities that survived for generations in the Sahel have watched their land become uninhabitable. The human cost has been catastrophic. Multiple severe droughts throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries killed over 3 million people in the Sahel region. These weren't quick disasters. They were slow-motion famines that stretched across years, destroying livelihoods, forcing mass migrations, and creating humanitarian emergencies that strained international aid systems. The numbers tell a grim story. Tens of millions of people were forced to abandon their ancestral lands in what experts call ecological migration, movement driven not by war or politics, but by environmental collapse. More than 40 million people experienced direct impacts, while an estimated 135 million faced indirect consequences through food insecurity, economic disruption, and social instability. Historians now refer to this prolonged crisis as Africa's Great Famine, a catastrophe that unfolded over decades rather than months. Faced with this existential threat, African leaders recognized that incremental approaches wouldn't work. In 2007, the African Union launched one of the most ambitious environmental restoration projects ever conceived: the Great Green Wall of Africa. The concept was striking in its simplicity, yet staggering in its scale. 11 Sahel nations would collaborate to establish a massive belt of vegetation stretching 7,775 kilometers, roughly the distance from New York to Mumbai, across the entire width of the African continent. This green barrier would be 15 kilometers wide, creating over 100,000 square kilometers of restored land. But this wasn't just about planting trees. The Great Green Wall Initiative aimed to restore 100 million hectares of degraded land by 2030, an area larger than Egypt. It sought to sequester 250 million tons of carbon dioxide, directly contributing to global climate change mitigation. And it aspired to create over 10 million jobs in sustainable land management, agriculture, and forestry. The technical challenges were immense. How do you grow vegetation in regions experiencing desertification? What species can survive with limited rainfall? How do you irrigate across such vast distances? How do you protect young plants from livestock and extreme weather? And perhaps most importantly, how do you fund and coordinate a project spanning multiple countries, each with different governments, languages, and priorities? This is where China's involvement became crucial. Chinese experts brought hard-won experience fighting desertification in their own country. China has spent decades battling the expansion of the Gobi Desert and implementing massive reforestation programs. Chinese scientists had identified plant species adapted to arid conditions. Chinese engineers had developed techniques for water conservation and efficient irrigation in desert environments. Chinese personnel deployed to multiple Sahel countries didn't just bring theoretical knowledge, they brought practical solutions. They provided seeds for drought-resistant plant species that had proven successful in similar Chinese environments. Species like drought-tolerant acacias, hardy grasses, and specialized shrubs that could stabilize soil and gradually improve its quality. Perhaps more importantly, Chinese engineers taught local communities the technology of well construction and irrigation systems suitable for arid regions. In many Sahel communities, water scarcity was the primary limitation on planting vegetation. Traditional wells either ran dry or were too deep to access economically. Chinese teams introduced drilling techniques and well designs that could reach deeper aquifers and maintain water access even during dry seasons. These weren't just technical transfers, they were capacity-building exercises. Chinese experts trained local workers to operate equipment, maintain wells, and troubleshoot problems. This knowledge would persist long after the Chinese teams departed, creating lasting local capacity for environmental restoration. As the initiative progressed, its scope expanded beyond the original vision. What began with 11 member countries grew to 20 participating nations and organizations, covering nearly all of Africa's arid and semi-arid regions. Countries beyond the Sahel recognized that desertification wasn't confined to one region. It was a continent-wide challenge requiring continent-wide solutions. The results, while still far short of the ultimate 2030 targets, have been genuinely remarkable. Approximately 4 million hectares of degraded land have been restored. Land that was essentially dead has been brought back to productivity. This represents roughly 4% of the overall goal, which sounds modest until you consider that 4 million hectares equals about 15,000 square miles, an area larger than Belgium. Around 335,000 jobs have been created through Great Green Wall initiatives. Jobs in nurseries growing seedlings, in construction teams building irrigation systems, in agricultural cooperatives farming newly restored land, and in management positions coordinating regional efforts. For communities that had lost traditional livelihoods to desertification, these employment opportunities represented hope and stability. Yet honesty requires acknowledging the challenges. The pace of progress must accelerate dramatically to meet the 2030 goals. Funding remains inconsistent. Political instability in some Sahel nations disrupts projects. Climate change continues to make the work harder, with unpredictable rainfall and rising temperatures. Still, the Great Green Wall demonstrates something profound. Environmental degradation, even at massive scale, isn't inevitable or irreversible. With sustained commitment, international cooperation, and appropriate technology, humans can restore ecosystems that seemed lost. And China's contribution, sharing knowledge earned through its own difficult environmental battles, exemplifies how international partnership can address challenges no single nation could solve alone. Infrastructure isn't only about power plants and environmental projects. For hundreds of millions of Africans, the most pressing infrastructure need is simpler and more immediate: a safe, decent place to live. Rapid urbanization is transforming Africa. People are leaving rural areas for cities at an unprecedented rate, seeking economic opportunities, education, and services unavailable in villages. Africa's urban population is expected to triple by 2050. This creates extraordinary pressure on housing markets that were already inadequate. In many African cities, the housing shortage is severe. Middle-class families spend years on waiting lists for apartments. Low-income workers crowd into informal settlements lacking basic services. Young professionals delay marriage and family formation because they can't find affordable housing. The shortage constrains economic growth. Companies struggle to attract workers who can't find places to live. Angola, a resource-rich nation on Africa's southwest coast, faces exactly this challenge. Despite significant oil revenues, decades of civil war and underinvestment left the country with a massive housing deficit, particularly in Luanda, the capital city. In 2020, a Chinese construction firm took on the role of EPC general contractor for the first phase of the KK project, one of the largest residential developments in African history. The scope was extraordinary. Located in the southern district of Luanda, the first phase covers 8.8 square kilometers, an area roughly the size of Gibraltar. Within this zone, the project includes 710 apartment buildings containing over 20,000 residential units. To put this in perspective, that's housing for potentially 100,000 people or more, depending on household sizes. But the KK project isn't just residential towers dropped onto empty land. It's comprehensive urban planning. The design includes 246 commercial buildings to provide shopping, services, and business spaces, ensuring residents don't have to travel long distances for daily needs. 9 primary schools and 8 middle schools address educational requirements for the families who will live there. 67 electrical substations, complete water and sewage systems, telecommunications infrastructure, and road networks create a functioning urban environment. The total construction area exceeds 3.31 million square meters. That's nearly 36 million square feet of built space. To construct this rapidly, thousands of workers were employed, the majority of them Angolan. For local laborers, these were stable jobs with regular wages, a rarity in an economy that had been disrupted by conflict and economic volatility. Beyond employment, the project created training opportunities. Chinese construction firms working on the KK project actively taught Angolan workers construction techniques, equipment operation, and project management skills. This wasn't purely altruistic. Having skilled local labor made projects more efficient and less dependent on expensive foreign workers. But the effect was transformative for many Angolan workers who gained skills transferable to future construction projects. When the first residents began moving into KK project apartments, the impact was immediate and emotional. Families who had lived in overcrowded conditions or informal housing suddenly had modern apartments with reliable electricity, running water, and proper sanitation. Children had schools within walking distance. The psychological impact of secure, quality housing shouldn't be underestimated. It provides stability that enables people to plan for the future, pursue education, and build better lives. Angola's housing initiative wasn't unique. Across the continent, similar partnerships were developing. In Guinea, a West African nation with substantial mineral wealth but significant infrastructure gaps, the government signed a comprehensive housing agreement with Chinese contractors valued at approximately $1.478 billion. This massive contract covered the construction of 20,000 housing units in Conakry, the capital city. The Conakry project encompassed every stage of development: initial surveying and geological assessment, architectural and engineering design, construction of buildings and infrastructure, and even necessary municipal engineering like roads, drainage systems, and utilities. The overall construction area approached 2 million square meters. For Conakry, a city where housing shortages had created severe overcrowding and driven real estate prices beyond what ordinary workers could afford, this represented a potential transformation. Guinean officials expressed profound gratitude, recognizing that the project would directly improve living standards for tens of thousands of citizens, while demonstrating that large-scale social housing was achievable even in developing economies. The broader significance extends beyond the immediate housing units. These projects demonstrate functioning models for addressing urban housing shortages through public-private partnerships and international cooperation. They create construction sector jobs and training opportunities. They show that African cities can accommodate rapid urbanization through planned development rather than uncontrolled sprawl. If power generation and housing address economic development and basic human needs, healthcare infrastructure addresses something even more fundamental: survival. Africa faces substantial healthcare challenges. The continent carries a disproportionate share of global disease burden, particularly communicable diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS. Maternal and infant mortality rates remain tragically high in many regions. Access to specialist medical care is limited, with most advanced facilities concentrated in major cities, leaving rural populations underserved. Infrastructure limitations compound these medical challenges.